Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway. You hear those names and you immediately think of just spectacular success, right? But behind that whole legend, there's a playbook. And it's one that's been remarkably consistent and honestly pretty understandable. So today, we're going to unpack it. We're going to dive right into the source material, decades of Buffett's own letters to his shareholders, to see exactly how he built one of the greatest business empires in history. Let's get into it.
Okay, so you'd think this global empire started with some flash of genius, but believe it or not, it actually began with a mistake. Back in the 1960s, Buffett got control of this company, Berkshire Hathaway, which was a totally struggling textile company in a dying industry. He even called it a terrible business later on. It was a decision, he said, was born from childish behavior. You know, the classic case of the dog who finally catches the car and has no idea what to do with it.
And yet, from that failing mill, this happened. Yeah, that number you're looking at, that's the total gain in Berkshire Hathaway's per-share market value from 1964 all the way to 2021. And no, that is not a typo. We're talking over 3.6 million%. It's a number that's almost impossible to wrap your head around, and it wasn't built on flash and hype, but on decades of discipline and compounding.
So that leads us right to the big question for this whole explainer. How did that happen? I mean, how does a mistake in a terrible industry turn into a powerhouse worth hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars? Well, the answer is in a set of core principles that sound really simple on the surface, but are just incredibly powerful.
All right, rule number one. This isn't about crunching numbers or looking at spreadsheets. It's all about psychology. To win, Buffett says you absolutely have to master your own emotions. You have to tame the wild, chaotic whims of Mr. Market. So this idea came from his mentor, the legendary Ben Graham. Here's how it goes. Imagine the stock market is your business partner, and his name is Mr. Market. Some days, he's just euphoric, totally giddy, and he offers to buy your shares at ridiculously high prices. Then, other days, he's completely depressed and offers to sell you his shares for absurdly low prices. Now here's the key. You don't have to trade with him. You can just ignore him. For Buffett, Mr. Market's wild mood swings aren't a risk. They are the single greatest source of opportunity you'll ever find.
And this kind of thinking creates two totally different mindsets. On one hand, you've got the speculator. This person lives and dies by Mr. Market's daily quotes. They buy on greed when prices are shooting up, and they sell on fear when things look bad. They're obsessed with price. But then you have Buffett's approach, which is to think like a business owner. He couldn't care less about the daily stock price. He's focused on the long-term value and earning power of the company itself. He picks stocks the same way he'd buy an entire business outright.
You know, when you really truly think like a business owner, a falling market actually becomes your best friend. This quote from one of his early letters just nails it. If you own a piece of a great business, why on earth would you be upset if you got the chance to buy more of it on sale? It's a deeply counterintuitive idea, but it is absolutely fundamental to the entire Buffett Playbook. So that's the mindset. But to actually take advantage of Mr. Market's craziness, you need capital. And I mean a lot of it. And that brings us to the real structural genius at the heart of Berkshire, its secret financial engine. And that engine is something called insurance float. And it's a beautifully simple idea. Think about it. Berkshire's insurance companies, like Geico, they collect all your premiums up front, but they don't have to pay out claims for months, sometimes years, or even decades. So that giant pool of money they're holding in the meantime, that's the float. And it's basically a massive, constantly revolving loan from all their policyholders that Berkshire gets to invest for its own profit.
And just look at the sheer scale of this thing. This table shows you how that float grew over 45 years. It went from less than $40 million in 1970 to nearly $88 billion by 2015, and today it's well over $100 billion. This isn't just some small advantage, it's a tidal wave of capital that's always refilling itself.
But here's the part that is just mind-blowing. For most insurance companies, this float has a cost, because they usually lose a little money on the insurance side of the business. But Berkshire's operations are so disciplined that they often make an underwriting profit. Now stop and think about what that means. They are literally being paid to hold and invest billions and billions of dollars of other people's money. It is an advantage that almost no other company in the world has. Okay, so we've got the right mindset.
we've got the money engine. So how does Buffett decide where to point all that capital? Well, this brings us to part 3 of the playbook, his rules for buying businesses.
And what he's looking for has been just stunningly consistent for 50-plus years. An acquisition has to pass 4 tests. First, it has to be a business they can understand, what he calls his circle of competence. Second, it's got to have good long-term prospects. Third, and this one is totally non-negotiable, it must be run by honest and competent people. And finally, number 4, it has to be available at an attractive price.
Now that last point about price, it actually led to a huge evolution in his thinking. This quote right here marks the big shift. He went from buying what he called cigar butts, fair companies at super cheap bargain basement prices, to buying truly wonderful, high-quality businesses for the long haul, even if the price wasn't some deep, deep bargain. Quality became everything.
And the perfect example of a wonderful company is See's Candies. I mean, just look at these numbers. Berkshire bought it for $25 million. Over the next 35 years, it spat out over $1 billion in profit, while only needing about $32 million in new capital. It was a cash gusher that didn't need much money put back into it, which freed up all those earnings to go out and buy other wonderful companies.
And this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, and maybe the most underrated part of the whole playbook. It's not about finance, it's not about strategy, it's about people. The Berkshire culture is the glue that holds this entire empire together.
Berkshire's whole structure is radically decentralized. Once Buffett and his partner Charlie Munger buy a business and decide they trust the manager, their job is basically to get out of the way. They give their managers almost total freedom. And this attracts founders who want to sell their company but also care deeply about its future. They know it'll have a permanent, hands-off home at Berkshire.
So what's the result of this culture? Well, in a letter from 2000, Buffett shared this almost unbelievable stat. In 36 years, how many managers of a major Berkshire company had voluntarily left to go work somewhere else? The answer is on your screen. 0. Not 1. That number tells you everything you need to know about their culture of trust and autonomy.
So there you have it. The Buffett Playbook boiled down to 4 key parts. 1. Think like an owner, not a speculator. Treat the market as your servant, not your master. 2. Build a massive, low-cost financial engine. 3. Use that engine to buy wonderful businesses you can hold forever. And 4. Create a culture where great people want to stay for a lifetime.
And that leaves us with one last thought. The rules are simple, right? The logic is crystal clear. Be rational, be patient, and trust great people. But actually doing it requires a level of patience, rationality, and emotional discipline that very, very few people have. And the difference, as it turns out, between simple and easy is everything.